Hi everyone, please support our videos on Patreon. The link's at the end of the video and in the down there part. Thank you, you're lovely.
Hey, remember when the Owl House was just fun?
Good show, old bean.
Hark! Doth mine eyes be cheated by some spell? Mayhaps this be a Gus episode? Why yes, dear viewers, this is indeed a proper Augustus Porter episode. The first of 3 in the entire series. Still more episodes than Willow somehow. Yeah, it's no secret that going forward, a lot of focus is taken away from Luce's 2 best friends, or rather, what scant amount of focus that was given to them in the first place. And that isn't through any fault of their own either. Willow and Gus are both wonderful characters with a wellspring of potential, some of which is even explored in the show proper. It's just that the show, and indeed the audience, seem to have different priorities when it comes to the characters they want to focus on. And that's honestly a shame, because Willow and Gus are both well deserving of the spotlight that they are so often denied. It's even sadder in poor old Gus's case because his stories tend to get overshadowed by whoever else is in the episode, this one included, but we'll get to that. Anyway, this episode starts with Gus having his mantle of human cryptid club leader being challenged by a recurring antagonist, Bartholomew, a character I had absolutely zero thoughts and feelings towards until quite recently when a certain character became so obnoxiously prevalent that this little bugger actually started to feel preferable. Matt says that his human know-how isn't up to snuff. That's not good. But then Gus pulls out the card of actually knowing a real human who can verify his claims. Ha! Take that, Matt. But then we remember that at this point of the show, Luce is still banned from Hexside. That's not good. Gus has to convince Luce to come to Hexside with him by lying about the ban being repealed. Luce, of course, believes him immediately because she's just so eager to be just like the greatest magic school protagonist of all time, Ako Kagari. Naturally, her enthusiasm about magic school comes in direct conflict with Ida being absolutely sick of it and wanting Luce not to bother. A point that might have carried more weight if Ida had bothered to actually teach Luce anything at this point. Behold, the rub of individualism. You actually have to work and back up your philosophy if you want others to agree with you. There is quite a bit of good development for Ida in this episode, but it's one of the things that kind of unduly overshadows Gus, which is sad. I get that Ida is a main character and Gus is a supporting character, but if he's going to be in the A plot, he shouldn't be overshadowed by the B plot. This happens a lot to him, poor guy, so I'm gonna try and make this more concise. Yes, Ida's perspective of all this is very interesting. She was a very promising young student that was held back by the restrictive parameters of the standardized education system. She was a unique student Hexside wasn't prepared to accommodate, and that soured her view of everything. But Luce is a very different person entirely who needs all the help she can get in her quest to become a witch, and it's becoming more and more clear that just stumbling into glyphs and helping Ida sell human garbage isn't cutting it. If magic school isn't right for Luce, that should be a conclusion that she comes to on her own. It can't be something that Ida decides for her. So she goes to see Bump to see if she can get Luce enrolled, and he is surprisingly agreeable, provided that Ida clear her own permanent record first. Here's another scene that's funny to go back to after seeing the episode Them's the Breaks Kids, because not only is it a callback, but it's actually painfully clear that Bump actually went through Ida's permanent record and removed all the cases of Principal Faust just being a nitpicky little pissant, cutting it down by more than half. Once again, Bump is a good principal, and I want good things for him. But yeah, the fact that Ida went back to a place that she has a very low opinion of and righting the wrongs she committed while she was there also Luce can enroll? That's not love, I don't know what is. Anyway, back to the A plot. It's during all this shenaniganery that we learn a crucial thing about Gus. Namely, he's actually a child prodigy having skipped 2 whole grades with how skilled he is at illusion magic. He can do so much. Bonnie, you stop that. Of course, still being younger than everyone else, Gus is seldom taken seriously or even listened to, despite his proven skill. Essentially, the Human Appreciation Society was the only thing that was really, well, his. So when that was jeopardized, he acted rashly because of course he did. He just wanted to hold on to something that he had control over. Was he wrong for getting Luce wrapped up in all this? Of course he was. But this is just the kind of mistakes that a kid like him would make. The key word being kid. Even younger than Luce and Willow despite being thrusted upward at their level. He was bound to make mistakes that would even have Luce go, dude, what the heck? This is the kind of thing that you can explore with a child prodigy story plus a bunch of others. If there's one thing that a subset of audiences could no doubt identify with, it's being labeled as a gifted child early in their education and being given a heaping helping of baggage to go along with it. It's certainly something I can identify with, given how emphatic my teachers were about my learning in 6th grade onward. The mountain of expectations lumped on you, the way you are disrespected by your peers, either out of elitism or perhaps jealousy, or having them trick or extort you for their proficiency if they're especially shitty. people berating you for whether or not your area of expertise is even useful for the future, the inevitable burnout you'll feel if all these earlier factors do not get addressed, and the absolute guilt and self-worth issues you'll have later in life as a result. There are a lot of toxic elements into the idea of gifted children that lends itself to a good episode conflict, especially towards the kids watching this show that might be experiencing these problems at this very moment.
But doesn't Emily's character arc have to deal with being a top prodigy? Won't Gus having a similar point of conflict make the show feel too repetitive?
Okay, one, Amity isn't even officially in the friend circle yet. Gus could have had his character explored in plenty of time before then if Dana wanted it. Second, who's to say that the two of them couldn't have gone through this together? Bond over the expectations and pressure put on them as a result of their excelling in school. Compare and contrast being a gifted child to abusive or negligent parents versus having a sound support system, which I can only assume Gus's father is to him. Allow the both of them to learn just being kids instead of meat sacks of potential. But no, we can't have that. We have much more important, much pacier baggage to prep for. After all, Disney cut the series short. Can't spend too much time focusing on the main and supporting cast now, can we? I know I'm jumping the gun in terms of criticism that's supposed to come later, but it really did just affect my rewatch of this episode. Gus is such a fun character with a wellspring of interesting story ideas that the crew either hasn't realized or chooses not to focus on. And the fact that he's just so consistently brushed over, even in his own episodes, is just depressing. By the time of writing this, Gus has been overshadowed like this 3 times. Episodes like this just leave me wishing that we had more. Him and Willow both.
That was adequate!
Oh hey, unobtrusive lore that doesn't come at the cost of the character's journey? Shocker! It probably helps that the lore itself, the nature of Palismans, is complemented by the fact that
Albert is just so cute. Look at him. Look at him being so baby.
That said, I wouldn't say that this episode is the strongest, unfortunately. Sure, King walked away from this episode learning a lesson about taking advantage of your loved ones in vulnerable moments, but that's just the B-plot. Luz herself doesn't really have a chance to learn anything valuable or grow as a person because she didn't really need to. Her conflict arises when she, Willow, and Gus take Albert, without telling Ida, to try to catch a school grudge rematch. They crash, chase after Albert, and then have to prove themselves to the Bat Queen that they aren't abusive Palisman owners. A sound basis for an episode, but that wasn't really something Luz had to prove in the first place. For one, she didn't even want to take Albert without Ida's permission. She only did it because King insisted that it was okay, and Albert didn't get injured from Luz's negligence, it was an accident. She didn't have to learn not to take Albert for granted in the Bat Queen's trials. She already cared about Albert and performed all these tasks laid out before her because she cared about Albert. She felt guilty about hurting him and wanted to bring him home. It comes to a head when Luz does prove herself and the Bat Queen still doesn't give Albert up. This leads to him having to step up and speak for himself and say that he cares about Luz as well. The Bat Queen walks away having to learn something in the end, not Luz. Like, why is the source of conflict in this episode walking away learning something and not the main character? Like, is that the point of this episode? Because if that's the point, it's kind of weird. Oh, also the Bat Queen's slanted eyes and broken English is... well, it's certainly a choice. Ah well, this episode might not be the best, but it still has its merits. Like one of Luz's most underrated moments.
Do you need me to stay home and take care of you?
I could put King in a little doctor's outfit.
Meh? No one wants to see that.
I do.
Not too shabby.
This is an episode that's become more interesting as time has carried on, not so much with what's happened in the show since it came out, but in the world of fandom and written literature. So the A-plot of this episode, Luz and King trying to write a book together and King gets taken advantage of by a predatory publisher, is one that I find very interesting for several reasons. For starters, it makes me think of all the stories that Lily and I have written together. By the time of this video, we had just finished The Sith Resurgence, a very self-indulgent sequel trilogy rewrite 3 years in the making. The first story that I was ever a part of that actually reached a conclusion. That's something I'm really proud of, and that's just one of the things that we've written together that we've allowed the public to see. I mean, we don't write to be published, of course. It's just a fun little thing for us to do. Just like Luz, we're just looking to write fun stories with our loved ones. Now you might be asking,
But hey, why don't you and Lily want to be published? It's so easy nowadays. All you have to do is file the serial numbers off your fanfic and send it to a publisher. Look at E.L. James. Look at Allie Hazelwood. Easy money. Why don't you all do that?
well, this episode's why. After writing over everything Luz contributed, King's story grabs the attention of a publisher who smooth talks him into a contract and makes him a household name. It's going great until King can't seem to write a sequel that's worthy of publishing. After talking to Luz doesn't help, the publisher then locks the both of them in literal crunch time, which he's allowed to do thanks to the contract. Not only does this result in one of the few times Luz turns into Dana's mouthpiece,
Some of the best books were written in literal crunch time.
That's a toxic mentality that contributes to burnout and unrealistic expectations.
but it's sort of indicative to what this particular industry has become. A lot of suits trapping creative people into contracts and telling them to just churn out profitable works under time constraints. And they aren't concerned with whatever you might want to write if it's not guaranteed to sell. This real-world phenomenon has been referred to as the TikTokification of literature, but frankly, that is an abysmal name, and since I'm not daft, I won't be using it. Instead, I'm going to use a more apt descriptor: tropification, because that's where it all started. See, publishers have come around to the idea of publishing fanfiction with the serial numbers filed off, partially due to the success of 50 Shades, but mostly because AO3 has handed them a very handy tool to check which kind of stories, but most importantly, which tropes for stories do big fucking numbers. So when they approach these plucky, doe-eyed 20-year-olds with book deals and promise to make them stars, what they're actually doing is just scooping up writers and locking them into contracts, just churning out story after story of popular tropes just cobbled together. The most recent and among the most egregious examples of this was Ali Hazelwood with her hit Reylo fanfic, The Love Hypothesis. Some agent found a Star Wars fic that was very popular and easily digestible for suburban cishet white women, and started coordinating with the author who, by her own admission, largely doesn't know what she's doing and, quote, needs all the hand-holding she can get. That's not a joke. She up and says that her ideas come from her editor telling her what tropes she should put in which story. This fucking paint-by-numbers approach is what allowed Hazelwood to release 5 books in 2 years, because they're just a bunch of popular tropes pieced together and guaranteed to sell, and that's what publishers care about. A lot of them aren't going to take risks on your next great American novel. What they want is to turn all those AO3 kudos and bookmarks into USD. Okay, we've really gotten sidetracked. Anyway, Ida and Lilith have a B-plot in this episode. They both chase after a MacGuffin, which turns out to be a scam, and then they beat up the guy who scammed them and bond over it a little at the end. Now, this is still quite a ways off from the reveal that Lilith was the one who cursed Ida. So, looking at the episode itself, it just looks like typical sibling rivalry. Like, plenty of bars, but you can tell that they still love each other. With the benefit of hindsight, however, it makes certain decisions from Lilith appear especially ghoulish.
Why don't you go home and rest? Wouldn't want you breaking a hip.
Gee, I wonder whose fault that might be, Lilith. I wonder why Ida might be at risk of breaking a hip. Is there something you want to tell the class? We'll get into the nitty-gritty of Lilith cursing Ida later, but this episode does well to highlight the fact that while she does want to cure Ida, she wants to cover her own ass even more. So, yeah. At least Ida is still her perfect self.
Ah, sure. Spare us.
And with this immaculate frame, it's time to say farewell. I'll see you next time.